The Roman denarius was once the backbone of the world's greatest empire, a coin of real silver, forged in strength and trusted across continents. But trust is fragile, more fragile than any metal. As the empire stretched its borders, its leaders stretched the truth behind their currency. What began as honest money turned into a hollow promise, diluted with every emperor who chose power over principle. By the 3rd century, the denarius had become a shell of its former self, barely containing any silver at all. Soldiers were paid in lies, merchants raised their prices, and citizens watched the value of their labor vanish. This is not just ancient history. It's a warning, because the playbook of slow debasement, of printing prosperity, is not buried in Rome. It's alive today, hidden beneath the polished words of modern central banks. The denarius died. What will happen to ours? The death of the denarius was not a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, corrosive decay hidden beneath imperial splendor. When Rome expanded rapidly, its economy demanded more coins to pay soldiers, build roads, and maintain control. But the silver mines were drying up, and instead of reducing spending, emperors chose a different path: debasement. They quietly reduced the silver content of the denarius while keeping its face value the same. What was once a coin of nearly pure silver became an alloyed fraud. People noticed. Prices surged. Trust wavered. To the average Roman, bread cost more not because it was scarce, but because the coin buying it was worth less. Inflation spiraled. The army demanded better pay in real metal, gold, not lies. To meet these demands, more coins were minted with even less value. A vicious cycle began, one that no law could stop. Eventually, entire regions abandoned the currency, reverting to barter or demanding foreign coin. Taxation collapsed as citizens refused to hand over real goods in exchange for worthless money. The state's grip weakened. Roads decayed. Garrisons deserted. And an empire that once stood for order and might slowly disintegrated from the inside. What's most haunting is how familiar this all feels. Today's fiat currencies, backed by nothing but belief, face the same temptation. Print more, inject liquidity, delay collapse. The parallels are chilling. Rome did not fall in a single year. It fell coin by coin, lie by lie, as confidence eroded and the system buckled. We now live in a world where central banks issue trillions without restraint, where inflation is called transitory until it isn't. Like the denarius, today's money carries the illusion of permanence. But when trust is gone, no currency survives. Rome learned that lesson too late. Will we? At its peak, the Roman Empire was a marvel of engineering, administration, and military dominance. Its borders spanned 3 continents. Its roads linked thousands of cities, and its legal system influenced civilizations for millennia. But beneath this grandeur lay a fatal flaw, one stamped on every silver coin that passed through a Roman's hand. The denarius, first minted in 211 BC, began as a powerful symbol of trust, a coin with real weight, real silver, and real value. For centuries, it served as the engine of commerce and control. But by the time of the 3rd century AD, it had become the carrier of a quiet poison. Its death would not only hollow out Rome's economy, but help dismantle the very civilization it once upheld. The early denarius was nearly pure, over 95% silver, its integrity matching the republic's sense of purpose. It enabled trade across provinces, paid the legions, and allowed Rome to manage the massive bureaucracy that grew with every conquest. As long as the empire expanded, it could plunder new wealth, seize resources, and mint more coins backed by actual metal. But empires do not expand forever. And when the borders hardened and costs kept rising, Rome turned inward. The silver mines in Spain and the Balkans couldn't keep up with the swelling demands of empire. That's when the slow murder of the denarius began. Instead of shrinking the government or curbing the military machine, emperors, from Nero to Caracalla, chose to debase the currency. They reduced the silver content while maintaining the illusion of full value. To the eye, the denarius looked the same. But the wait told another story. The feel of the coin changed, the shine dulled, and the consequences spiraled. Merchants began charging more. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Prices rose faster than wages. And the poorest citizens suffered first. But instead of reversing course, the emperors doubled down. They minted more coins, with even less silver, flooding the economy with empty promises. By the time of Emperor Gallienus in the mid-3rd century, the denarius was nearly worthless, less than 5% silver, the rest being copper and tin. Rome had created a zombie currency, dead in substance, animated only by force and memory. But money, at its core, is a contract of belief. And when that belief breaks, the system follows. Inflation ran rampant. Bread, once a staple for all, became a luxury. Tax collectors could no longer gather enough resources to sustain the army or rebuild infrastructure. Rome's financial arteries clogged. Entire provinces, especially in the West, began rejecting imperial currency altogether. They bartered. They used foreign coins. They hoarded gold and silver. The state lost control, not just of its borders, but of its internal cohesion. And with that loss came consequences. The military, unpaid and disillusioned, became a mercenary class loyal only to gold. They backed emperors who promised riches, not Rome. Civil wars erupted. Provinces broke away. Infrastructure crumbled as roads fell into disrepair and aqueducts ran dry. Local officials turned corrupt or impotent. Meanwhile, the imperial government, desperate for funds, levied higher and more brutal taxes. But citizens resisted. Many simply walked away. Small farmers abandoned their land. Urban dwellers fled cities. Trade routes fell silent, and a once organized empire slipped into fragmentation. What makes this story even more tragic is how preventable it was. The tools of destruction weren't barbarians or plague, but decisions made at the top, repeated year after year, based on short-term survival and political convenience. Every emperor who debased the denarius postponed collapse while deepening the rot. They bought loyalty for another year, but sold off a piece of Rome's future in return. The currency, once a source of pride and power, became a daily reminder that Rome no longer honored its promises. Now turn to today. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Modern fiat currencies, from the US dollar to the euro to the yen, are backed by nothing more than government decree and public faith. Central banks no longer need silver mines or gold reserve. They simply press buttons, inject liquidity, and create digital trillions overnight. Like the emperors of old, they justify this as necessary, for stimulus, for recovery, for security. But each injection weakens the underlying value. Each round of quantitative easing, each bailout, each unchecked deficit spending erodes the purchasing power of money while increasing dependence on a financial system that no longer behaves with restraint. Inflation, once taboo, is now treated as a tool. Debt ceilings are raised like rituals. And just like in Rome, the consequences begin quietly. A loaf of bread becomes a few cents more. A rent check eats up more of a paycheck. Savings lose their meaning. And just like the Roman citizens who once rejected the denarius, people today look for escape, buying gold, hoarding assets, fleeing to crypto, shifting trust away from the system. The state still functions, but the foundations creak. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes. Rome debased its currency over a century before collapse. We may not have a denarius in our pocket, but we carry the same blind faith in paper, or pixels, that can vanish overnight. The deeper truth is this: money is civilization's mirror. When it is honest, stable, and respected, societies flourish. When it is manipulated, hollowed, and debased, societies fracture. Rome's fall was not sudden. It was slow, predictable, avoidable, and rooted in a single devastating decision: to lie with money. We are now watching that lie resurface, in real time, across the globe. The death of the denarius is not a relic of ancient history. It's a warning, one we ignore at our peril. The tragedy of the denarius was not just economic, it was civilizational. As the coin lost its silver, the empire lost its cohesion. Every act of debasement didn't just dilute the currency, it diluted trust. And when people stopped trusting money, they stopped trusting each other. This is what made the Roman collapse so devastating. It wasn't just about prices rising. It was about a society where contracts meant less, taxes became unbearable, soldiers turned on their leaders, and communities broke away from the center. The slow disintegration of the denarius mirrored the slow unraveling of Roman identity. A farmer in Gaul, a trader in Egypt, a soldier in Britannia, they no longer shared the same sense of unity. They no longer believed they were part of the same empire. And all of it began with the lie stamped into their coins. By the 3rd century, inflation was so intense that Rome had to create entirely new currencies just to restore some sense of order. The Antoninianus, introduced by Caracalla, was supposed to replace the denarius, but it too was debased rapidly. The people were not fooled. Merchants demanded payment in raw silver or gold. Soldiers were bribed not with coin but with land or captured treasure. The economy fractured into layers, one for the elite who could demand real value, and another for the masses trapped in the collapsing system. The monetary breakdown was not an isolated financial event. It spread into every part of Roman life. Supply chains, justice systems, military command, and local governance. Provinces began minting their own coins. Some governors became kings in all but name. Rome was still an empire in theory, but in practice it had become a patchwork of desperate regions, stitched together by collapsing money and decaying promises. This story resonates today with uncomfortable clarity. Modern monetary systems rely on confidence, not metal. And central banks around the world are playing a dangerous game, flooding the economy with cheap credit, printing trillions to solve political problems, and treating inflation like a controlled fire instead of a spreading blaze. The language is different, but the logic is the same. Governments are debasing not the metal in their coins, but the meaning behind their currency. And citizens are noticing. They may not analyze M2 money supply or bond yields, but they feel it when their rent doubles, when food costs more, when their wages fall behind inflation. They feel it in their gut, just like Romans once did. When a currency loses its meaning, everything becomes negotiable. Morality bends. Corruption grows. People no longer think long-term. They hoard. They evade. They disconnect. The glue that holds society together, shared value, shared rules, shared sacrifice, starts to dissolve. Rome paid the price over generations. Today, we risk doing the same, but much faster. Technology has accelerated everything: printing, debt issuance, capital flight, panic. What took Rome a century to destroy, we may do in decades. And yet, just like in Rome, few in power seem willing to stop it. The incentives are misaligned. Politicians win elections by spending. Central banks are pressured to protect markets. Voters are promised benefits paid with borrowed time. It's easier to lie through money than to confront reality. But reality always returns. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. The death of the denarius wasn't the end of Rome, but it was the turning point. It marked the moment when Rome lost its ability to govern itself honestly. Everything after that was survival, bribing soldiers, taxing the desperate, and retreating behind walls. Today, we see walls going up again. Not physical ones, but economic ones. Capital controls, wealth taxes, rising surveillance, digital currencies designed to track every transaction. These are not signs of strength. They are symptoms of fear. Fear that the people will stop believing in the money. Fear that the center cannot hold. In that sense, the story of the denarius is more than a tale of ancient failure. It's a blueprint for how civilizations die. Not with a bang, but with a series of rationalizations, each one eating away at trust. When money lies, everything else becomes negotiable. And what collapses isn't just the economy, it's the very idea of who we are. The denarius did not vanish overnight. It lingered, debased, distrusted and despised, long after it had lost any real value. That's what makes currency collapse so dangerous. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It decays gradually in full view while people pretend it's still worth something. The coin is still passed around. Laws still recognize it. The state still demands taxes in it. But behind closed doors, no one wants it. That was Rome's silent disaster. An empire pretending its money still mattered while everyone scrambled for gold, land, or power. And in that gap between appearance and reality, corruption flourished. Officials extorted citizens to meet impossible quotas. Soldiers demanded bribes to keep order. The poor were squeezed, while the elite fled into villas with private guards and secret stores of wealth. The collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet. Systemic.gor. Rotten from the inside. We are seeing echoes of this today. Central banks assure us inflation is under control, even as purchasing power erodes month by month. Governments borrow endlessly, knowing their debts will be paid with cheaper future money. People are working more and affording less. The illusion persists because the structures of modern life, banks, markets, pensions, still function. But trust is thinning. Every stimulus package, every bailout, every emergency measure chips away at the belief that the system is fair, that money is stable, that tomorrow will resemble today. And like in Rome, the result is fragmentation. Not of provinces this time, but of class, of access, of information. Those closest to the flow of new money, banks, investors, insiders, thrive. Everyone else falls behind. In late Rome, a two-tier economy emerged. On one side were those who could demand real payment, gold, goods, favors. On the other, those forced to accept debased currency, trapped in a loop of rising prices and falling value. Today's version is just as real. Asset owners ride inflation. Wage earners drown in it. The upper class hedges with stocks and property. The middle and working class struggle with rent and groceries. The system rewards proximity to power, not productivity. This is how civilizations hollow out, not just economically, but morally. When effort no longer translates to stability, people disengage. They stop building. They start surviving. Rome tried to legislate its way out. It passed price controls, banned alternative currencies, forced farmers to stay on their land. None of it worked. The harder the empire clamped down, the more people slipped through its fingers. Control is not the same as trust. Once faith in the currency is gone, coercion becomes the only tool left. And coercion always breaks. What happened to the Denarius is not a mystery. It's a pattern. Expansion, overreach, monetary distortion, social decay. And that pattern didn't end with Rome. It traveled. Through Byzantium, through the Weimar Republic, through every empire that believed it could print reality without consequence. Now we stand at the edge of the same mistake. Our money may look different, digital, colorful, encoded, but its fate hinges on the same question. Do people still believe in it? Not because the law says they must, but because they choose to. When that belief dies, so does the money. And when the money dies, the system that depends on it begins to unravel. That is what Rome teaches us. Not a lesson of ancient ruins, but of modern warnings. A coin is never just a coin. It is a promise. And when that promise is broken enough times, no empire, no matter how powerful, can survive. The slow death of the denarius reveals something deeper than economic failure. It exposes a civilizational flaw, the belief that power can substitute for trust. Rome believed it could command value through decree, that people would obey simply because the state said so. But money doesn't work that way. Value is not imposed. It's agreed upon. And once that agreement cracks, everything resting on it begins to shake. Rome didn't fall because it was invaded. It fell because the people inside stopped believing in the money, in the laws, in the future. When soldiers aren't paid in real value, they defect. When farmers are taxed into ruin with worthless currency, they flee. When merchants are forced to trade under fixed prices with broken coins, They lie, cheat, and smuggle. The real collapse happened long before the barbarians crossed the border. The empire was already hollow. Today we face that same illusion, that money, because it is everywhere, is still meaningful. That because it can be created at will, it must still hold value. But history whispers otherwise. Every empire that tampered too long with its currency paid the price, not just in inflation but in institutional decay. Trust was always the true reserve. The gold was secondary. And right now, that trust is bleeding. Governments spend without limit. Central banks monetize debt with no plan to unwind. People are told inflation is normal, their struggle temporary, their questions dangerous. But deep down they know. They feel the squeeze. They sense the instability. They begin to plan around the system rather than within it. That is the beginning of divergence. The empire still stands, but the people have already left. The fall of the Denarius reminds us, money is not a tool of rulers. It is a contract with the rule. Break that contract long enough, and even the strongest empire will find itself standing on sand. Not with a crash, but with a long, slow silence that no one can reverse. We don't measure collapse by the sound it makes, but by the silence that follows, the silence of abandoned markets, of trust withdrawn, of value forgotten. That's how the Roman denarius died, not with a final decree, but with a quiet exit from the hearts and hands of the people. No speech could save it. No reform could restore it. Because once a currency loses its meaning, it cannot be resurrected by law. It must be reborn through pain, through honesty, through sacrifice. Rome never managed that rebirth. It splintered. It shrank. It was replaced by smaller kingdoms, simpler economies, and harder currencies, ones backed again by metal, not illusions. The warning is timeless. When governments confuse the ability to print money with the ability to create value, they invite collapse. When they fund wars, welfare, and bureaucracy with empty credit, they don't build, they drain. And though the walls may not fall immediately, the foundation quietly rots. The Denarius tells us that economic decay always precedes political ruin, that a dying currency is the first signal flare of civilizational breakdown. Today we see signs everywhere: runaway spending, artificial markets, growing inequality. The question is no longer if the cycle will repeat, but whether we'll see it in time. Because the end doesn't come with flames. It comes when people stop asking what a dollar, or a denarius, is worth, and start asking what they're willing to trade for something real. When that moment arrives, the empire is already gone. Only the illusion remains, until it too fades.